Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George-Affleck.
And it's time for
You Get COVID and You Get COVID and You Get COVID. Unspun. I mean, can I tell you that two of my staff now we're not working. There's only a couple of us in the office now because of this new variant. Two of my staff have got COVID. That means now almost more than 50% of the people who work for me have now had COVID. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And the list of people that I know that are unrelated to one another that are dropping like flies in terms of test case positives or the presumption that they have it, because testing is now, I mean, you just can't unless you're high risk. You're not getting a test, which is, somewhere to dive in on all of this. Like I got somebody tweeted at me. Actually, I think it was Steve Darling who tweeted at me that when the news broke about Ontario giving families for back to school, everybody gets a test. You get a test. Actually, everybody gets two tests. And I was thinking to myself,
really?
Never once. I've never had a test. I've never seen a rapid test.
Really?
Oh
God, I've had so many now for not rapid tests, but
I don't leave this. England, but... I don't leave this bubble though. I mean, like I'm really.
Yeah, that's true. You are pretty tight. Although, that's what's crazy about this though. Who works for me? She can't figure it out. She hadn't left her bubble. She maybe went to a grocery store to get some groceries. Social distance. She can't figure it out where she would have. Whereas the other person, she got it from her kid, I think, from daycare, and the daycare person has it. So
yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And the guidance on what to do if you are symptomatic, or the guidance on what to do if your child is symptomatic, that's a big struggle, because I'm a proponent of in-class learning. Like I listened enough to it, and I know it makes people come at me, and you know what? At me, bro. It's fine. But for me, I hear what the public officials, the health officials are saying when they're like, school is the safest place. It's not school is zero risk, but it's the same people in the same place with measures every day. It's almost like it's a big bubble, but it's that bubble, as opposed to if kids don't have school to go to, they're going to be hanging out at the mall or in the basement or at the friend's house or in the whatever, and mixing different, to coast to anyway. So my feeling is having in-class learning is so vital for kids' well-being and what have you. I would like to know what the guidance is, like if because my son usually, I mean, he was one of those kids who had croup as a baby, so he usually starts coughing, November, and stops coughing February.
And you're forbidden to cough now, of course. Nobody's allowed to cough anymore. You can't go in public and cough. We were coming home from the UK for after Christmas, as we talked about last week, and we were there for a while. And both Amanda and Quinn had a bug. It wasn't COVID, but they had a cough. And we're like, oh my God, we're not gonna be allowed on the plane. People are gonna look at us. It's like, so you're like, dude, okay, Quinn, just don't cough. Don't cough. Just hold it in. He's like, I can't.
Oh, poor kid. Shit.
We just got to get through customs. We just got to get through the security. We got to get through. Just hold it. It's like, I know it's torture, pure torture from a parenting point of view.
It's crazy.
So, anyways,
we have all these.
And as a parent, you got your kid in the school, though. Sorry, we have a delay here, I think, for our audio this week. But there's the fact that parents, we have to get our kids back. It's really we have to make a living. So,
well, and kids need to be in school for a multitude of reasons, but more and more, because we know so much more about this virus than we did in March of 2020, that the understanding and mitigating of risk associated with it, and every death is tragic, so don't get me wrong, but there was a time where we had no idea how this would rip through the population. And with Omicron, it's a next level, and there's a lot to unpack with that. But just trying to navigate where we are now, and when we listen to health officials In our case, it's Dr. Henry, but I'm listening to officials across the globe now. Shane Woodford's Substack newsletter out of Denmark is must read on so many levels. He wrote, I think it was yesterday's, or his most recent anyway, where Danish officials are actually considering in school, when kids test positive for Omicron in school, they don't go home, they go over to that class.
So different class. Like a
Same
different
school,
room.
different class.
Same school, different room. Interesting. So that's the thing. We're trying to figure out ways to make this work. We're trying to find ways to, live with this virus now that it seems to be forever. It seems.
Well, and that's what we're getting from science, right? Like there's no putting this genie back in the bottle, particularly when so many people stubbornly refuse to be vaccinated. And that's just a fact here. I mean, the reason why we don't have polio, the reason why we don't have smallpox, the reason why we can control some of the incredibly infectious diseases that exist on this planet are because vaccination and science work. I mean, and it's quite crazy and chaos making, other than the fact that there are some other therapeutics coming online, which is great. I don't know if you saw that story in the US about the course of pills that you can now, it's the Pfizer, I believe, I can't remember the name of the actual drug, but the Biden administration has ordered 10 million courses, and it's like, well, that's great, but there are more than 10 million unvaccinated people in the United States. Like, okay, and everybody wants those. So,
well, and then you've got Quebec, which made a decision this week to fine. They haven't just said how much that fine is, but they're basically the argument by the Premier-Horgan is that if you're not going to get vaccinated, then you must be punished, and that will be a fine, because the cost of with 75% of the people in ICUs being people who are not vaccinated, then you basically are costing our system money, and not only, but also putting other people's lives at risk. People who need to be in ICUs for car accidents or whatever, and other care, and not to mention the amount of healthcare workers that are getting sick themselves. And so he's decided to go hardcore in this, which is very interesting, because they're at 90% there. They only have a 10% to go. And so we've always been playing around with this number, 90%. It's the magical number. We're going to get to 90, and it'll all will be solved. And who cares about the 10% who don't want to get vaccinated? Well, now it seems like we do care about that 10%, because they are representative of a bigger portion of the people that are getting sick and real sick. And it's costing us. It's challenging us, especially as this variant, and you can get this thing over and over and over again. I mean, I know people that. There's a guy I saw who's had it COVID 6 times. I think he's a politician in the States, and I think he's a senator. I forget who it was. He's had it 6 times. He's either an idiot or he's like super weak immune system. I don't know, but that's an example. This is not something where you get it and it's gone. You get it over and over and over again, even when you're vaccinated, as we have learned. So,
2 reminders on that. Number 1, if you get it, your chances of reinfection are higher. So the people that are like, I had it already, I don't need a booster, you do. You actually do. And number 2, yes, people who are vaccinated can transmit, but it's a lower viral load. So the risk is lower. This thing is, the Omicron is what, 70 times more transmissible, like 70, because it's all up in our throats and our noses, where the Delta was deep in our lungs, which is why scientists are hoping that it's less severe in vaccinated and boosted people. But people are so keyed in on how many people in ICU are vaccinated, or see, there's vaccinated people in there. Yeah, there's 70. There's 70 with an underlying health issue. Now tell me about the 30-year-old who died on Tuesday who was unvaccinated, right? That is avoidable. It's avoidable. Please get vaccinated. Like, that's what I can't, as a parent, I'm just like, I want to hug the people that are so scared of something that could really legitimately save their lives. Like,
but do we go as far as Quebec? Should we go?
No.
Is that, and that's kind of the question I kept asking, because I was filling in on CKNW this week, and it was pretty split, the opinion. It was like, how far do we go to get that 10% or that 5 or 6% of people who continually seem to get sick or die? What is the role of government? Are you there to protect people, mandating vaccinations or fining people for not getting vaccinations, getting hardcore on that last 10%? Because politically, it may not be as dangerous to worry about, not to worry about that 7 to 10% of people who aren't vaccinated. Who cares? It's not going to hurt me politically because 90% of the people are with me on this. So it's an interesting dilemma politically to make that decision. Obviously, you worry about authoritarianism and this whole approach, but sometimes maybe government needs to, and I'm not saying this is what I agree with, should be to put the foot down and say, I'm sorry, the whole argument about, hey, we're mandated to wear seatbelts, as a rule, for example.
Yeah, or you'll be fined. If you go through a roadblock and you're not wearing your seatbelt, you'll be fined. That already exists, because for the greater good, wearing a seatbelt. But the my body, my whatever. Well, I'm gonna do my own research on Google. All of that aside, do I think that people should be punished at the hospital? No, that's my opinion on what I see happening here. I wouldn't be against the idea of a tax break for people who are.
Okay, incentive based.
Carrot, I like it. Carrot, not a stick.
Yeah.
Give me a carrot, because I'm going to do it. Well, you saw what happened when they said, okay, you know what? You have to be vaccinated to go into a liquor store or cannabis store. Boom, people started getting vaccinated.
Yeah. Coffee shops in France, same thing.
Oh, I love the French president's attitude of, you know what? I'm here to piss off anti-vaxxers. I'm here to make you angry, because he's not even hiding behind anything. He's like, guess what? I'm having none of it. So, and he knows that the majority of the people who will cast a ballot when next he is up for re-election are vaccinated.
Yes.
So, and the ones that aren't might just die.
Yes. I know. And anyways, but here's one thing that your column this week was quite good, because I think it's a good transition point here, because dealing with COVID and coming to terms with the fact that we have to assume that it's here to stay. It may get weaker and weaker, which is great, and become a cold. And people who aren't vaccinated are putting themselves at risk, no matter what level of weakness it becomes. You have this risk. That's the way it goes. That decision about, short term, short term versus long term. And I think there were, the storm issue and the climate change this week. You kind of touch on this with your column in the Orca .ca about. Well, give us one, because I think it's a good conversation to have about decision making at government levels about climate change and about what's happening certainly in Vancouver and the region.
Yeah, well, I pluck off at the moment where I first saw a king tide. Do you remember the first time you ever heard of the term king tide? I mean, it's a rather regal term for something that I found to be astonishingly terrifying. The first time I saw it was down at Kitts Beach, right by Kitts Pool, a place that I grew up, born and raised, right here. And never in my life had I ever seen the ocean up and over the seawall by Kitts Pool. And it wasn't stormy. It wasn't like it was splashing over, because I've seen storms before. But this was a calm day, and it was all the way in. And I'm like, okay. And then I go home and I look it up, and I got like some namby-pamby, it's the moon and a thing, and in the spring. And I'm like, okay. And then I see it again, and it happens a number of times a year. I'm like, okay. Anyways, you can read the whole thing. My discovery of, long and the short of it is, if you dig a little deeper in the Environmental Protection Agency definition of a king tide, what it's showing us is what eventually will just simply be high tide. So where the king tide comes to is actually where high tide every single day will be eventually. It is your marker.
Interesting.
And I was like, okay, are we going to wait until the water's that high all the time before we start building the infrastructure? And in the meantime, are we just going to talk about how we're going to pay for paper cups and paper bags at the fast food restaurant in the name of stopping the king tide? Like, I just feel like money is not being spent, and the great minds that are at our disposal are not being utilized to fix what's broken. Because that king tide, coupled with a storm, blew out the seawall around Stanley Park, blew out Ambleside, it started licking up at the doorsteps of some heritage buildings in West Vancouver. I mean, this is really, really real. Like, how many more atmospheric rivers do we need before we wrap our heads around the fact that it's here now? And a gas tax ain't going to fix it.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to tax, then make the tax directly go to fixing the problem. And there's the environmental issue, the bigger story about climate change. 100% we need to deal with that. Can Vancouver, it's on loan, do that? No, of course, they can create policies about, certain stuff related to greenhouse gas emissions in a way, which it has done. But at the end of the day, and the city of Vancouver, actually, compared to the park board, has done a good job as far as planning for some stuff it can control, as far as development, for example, and how you build stuff in the areas where there might be risk. That there has to be an assumption that one day you will be flooded on any new developments, for example, in the Falls Creek Flats, where for example, the hospital is being built. There's a whole design about the assumption that Falls Creek will flood and in the development of that hospital. So people shouldn't worry about that because the city was very careful in making sure it was designed that way. That it is sadly that this climate change and this flooding is going to be a normal thing. However, here we have the park board, as the Cones is Stanley Park, spending millions on that, and their seawall. Interestingly, this week we saw what happened. The areas that they had fixed up were fine. It's the areas that were vulnerable that they haven't been taken care of that were hurt. What bugs me is I don't see from the majority of this park board a desire to make the priority. There clearly is quotes by the certain members of the park board that seem to be saying, well, we're just going to have to see what we want to prioritize. I mean, literally, it's a seawall on the waterfront that is literally 100% vulnerable. So, okay, so are you saying that cones in the park are a higher priority for a bike lane? Not going to speak against bike lanes, but is that a priority, and spending millions on that over spending millions on your seawall, which is used by people and it's world renowned? How is that not an immediate assumption as a politician to go, okay, everything else over here has to stop. We need to put all of our energy on the one thing right now that's the most vulnerable in our parks, besides people camping in them, is our seawall, which is literally being battered by the logs, which is the other issue. How do we deal with all these logs that are getting loose? What is there a thing we can do about that and smashing our seawall apart? We have to look at all these things. And you brought that up in your comment. It's like there doesn't seem to be the motivation, certainly on this park board, to do that, to plan for that. They've got a peer plan for Jericho that was approved in 2017. It still hasn't been built. And if it had been, it would have been concrete, and it wouldn't have now you wouldn't see the damage that you see today because of the storm last weekend, which was a coupling of king tide and a massive storm at the same time. Worst case scenario, yes, but a taste of the future to come very soon at a city near you called Vancouver.
Yeah, right now, right here. And we've learned that on all of the highways, provincially speaking, but we're looking at the city of Vancouver being ground zero for so much of what the climate emergency is bringing to the table. I mean, it's a sad truth. And you know what? If the politicians have been caught off guard like citizens have been, fair enough. Change your tack. Change your path. Pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Take down the ridiculous, unnecessary cones and take the money from that is our money, and fix the infrastructure that needs to be repaired in so that everybody in the community can access that very important space. As you said, it's a world-renowned place and space. This extra personal agenda crap needs to stop. We need to get on the same page. The siloing of politics needs to stop. We all need to get this together because this city will crumble if we don't fix what's broken. Clearly, we've seen just in a handful of weather events that this has become beyond urgent. And if the people who are currently in office can't manage the load of this pivot, we need to change the people in office.
Yeah, definitely. And here's what I always think about, and I know politics is different than being on a strata council or even in your own home, or you have a small strata. I live in a large strata with 300 units. We're required to put a 25-year capital plan, basically, of what we need to replace, a predictive plan and start funding that plan with the assumption that these things will need to be done. That this will be done this way. And I don't get the sense that Park Board in Vancouver does that. They say they do, but you got to say, okay, this seawall is beautiful here right now, but what's it going to look like even in normal times? Like, what's the financial plan for you to replace the seawall always ongoing? It's like there's no sense
George, we're gonna leave it, and we're gonna let some wildflowers grow for the bees.
Yeah, that's you're joking, but it's almost true.
It is true. It is. You cannot run and play in a park in Vancouver because they decided not to mow the lawn. So kids can't play. And so
Yes.
Lord knows what you're stepping over or in or on. It's just, no.
Yes, and so you can make that leap.
Needs to be.
You can make that leap, assumption that that the majority of this park board are intentionally letting our parks go take nature's path because nature is let nature run its course. People, that seems to be what they're doing.
A couple of park board commissioners have gone so far as to say that they are seeing their dream realized in seeing parks in Vancouver overgrown and let to go completely wild. And it's astounding. I mean, meanwhile, up at UBC, where it's a whole different ball game, it's just up the hill, but it's a completely different mindset. There are volunteers in Pacific Spirit Park ripping out the blackberry bushes because they're an invasive species, which I didn't know until I interviewed somebody from the Invasive Species Council of British Columbia, which I highly recommend people check out. I learned a lot because I was like, why are they taking our brambles? I love picking berries off of there. When it was explained to me, they're an invasive species. They're taking over everything, and they're making it so that the rest of the ecosystem there cannot thrive and survive because they're being blocked out. And it's just that piece of education. And there are some, I got to say, there are others on the Park Board Commission who are in the minority, who are trying to fight heart and soul to keep the parks in this beautiful part of the world open and available for so many of us who live in places and spaces that don't have big, beautiful, sprawling yards, right? The parks are where we go to gather safely with our friends and family, and they should be kept up to be utilized to their fullest extent. Don't pave paradise, but don't let it go, the opposite. Anyways, I can just go. Can we talk about masks? Can we talk about masks?
It happens very quickly too. It happens very quickly. That trend, that destruction, that nature's course happens quickly. So you got to be on it. The blackberry bush is a good metaphor for that. So
look at the Arbutus Greenway if you want to know how things can take over. It is one big bramble all the way up on both sides, and for many, not a problem because it used to be a railroad track. So they're thinking that's green, when in fact that green can then, it's like English ivy. If we all stopped mowing our lawns and stopped everything in a couple of years, English ivy would tear down our buildings, like literally tear them down.
It would.
Let's talk about masks. I think it's really important. Do you don the KN95 mask? Do you wear like the specific mask?
No, I don't have the K95. They're hard to get, to be honest. And I have my masks are triple layer, but they're not K95s, but they're pretty good. Sometimes I'll forget and I'll have a crappy one with me. It's like, we're trying to improve our mask etiquette, whatever you call it, in our house. We have a little basket of dirty and clean ones, black ones, the dirty one, the white ones, the clean ones.
That sounds like an Amanda thing, not a George thing.
No, it's actually a George thing. No, that's
a George thing. I stand corrected.
Yes,
Make note, McLean. Jody was wrong. George was right.
Anyways, but Australia Open. Is that where we're going?
Okay, one more thing about the KN95, because I think I mentioned this before, is I have always been a mask person, but I always thought, leave the surgical grade masks for those who are in hospital settings or in long-term care facility, whatever. But I've always wanted a mask that was as protective as I was told it needed to be. So I would do the multi-layer and I'd try and fit it a bit. But then Kennedy-Stewart, formerly head of the CBC, formerly with Twitter, she's in social media genius and a fabulous follow on Twitter, by the way. She put out this, I think it was about 3-4 weeks ago. She put out a post about these, properly fitting Canadian made paper KN95 masks. And I thought, those are neat. And I went on and there was a sale. It was like a Boxing Day sale. I don't know. So I was like, sure, buy. They're not cheap, but they're not crazy expensive. And they're made in Canada. They're called Mask C, MASK, the letter C. And so I bought a bunch of them. And you know what? Sending my kid to school wearing that makes me feel a little bit better. And it's, you can get a couple of days wear out of each one. They're not they're disposable-ish.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked Jason Tetro, if you air them out to dry and you make sure that there were no droplets, they never got extraordinarily dirty, then they should be okay for a couple of uses. Whereas in a perfect world, we'd just throw that away, but we don't live in a perfect world. So there's my mask tip for the people, because Mask C, I had no problem getting them, and they're very good value. And
no, and I think that one of the Aaron O'Toole, the leader of the Conservatives, kind of went on a thing this week, across Canada campaign about why the federal government's letting us down on that front. Like, why don't we have easy access to the N95s yet? Why don't we have testing kits massively being produced for the provinces to acquire, or pharmacies or wherever? It's a good question. Why is this? Again, it goes back to, okay, are we going to now just assume this COVID's going to end? Are we going to assume climate change is going to not end? When do we have?
We're all overwhelmed.
You got to deal with the issues at hand when they're happening, and assume that assume the best, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Right?
Prep for the worst, yes, and hope for the best. So now we will take that segue into the Australian Open. How did you feel about all of this when Novak Djokovic was on his way to Australia, and it was like?
Yeah, he's a well-known anti-vaxxer. He's had COVID. We know that. He had a party some time ago. We all know this guy's background. He went to Australia to this tournament. I don't understand. I have two questions. First of all, how he got into the country in the first place. He lied, apparently, as it turns out. But even then, I thought Australia was really strict, because I know that coming into Canada, you got to get your test when you land. But he didn't have it, I guess. But he had it right before Christmas, it turns out now. And he did an interview with a French journalist.
He tested positive. He did 2 rapid tests that were negative, and then he did a PCR test that came back positive. And after receiving the positive test, he kept an interview with a journalist, took his mask off only to get his picture taken. The journalist nor the photographer were informed that he was positive for COVID-19. And then he checked a box. You know how it's like, have you been out of the country for the 14 days before? He checked the box saying no. And then he said, well, it was my agent who did that, and that was human error. Super sorry about that. But it's like all of these things adding up. How about no? How about no?
Mm-hmm.
How about just no? And people are rioting in the streets.
Yeah,
in Australia, like
he's a poster boy for bad behavior in a way that John McEnroe, was, but in another level of. John McEnroe was bad for the behavior on the court, for being a bad boy and being in tennis.
He was fun to watch.
He got a lot of trouble back in those days. Yeah, he got a lot of trouble for that. This guy seems to be getting away with this. He doesn't seem to be getting slapped at all by the tennis associations. Why is he not being? Why don't they just say, piss off, you can't play in our tournament, goodbye? Because you know what? Money talks and BS.
Money,
walks.
baby.
It's like unbelievable. And I think that is not good PR. That's bad. How does that not work against you as an organization when you have 90% of the people who are supportive of vaccinations, pretty much, and are vaccinated, going, whoa, what the hell? Why is this guy becoming a lightning rod for this negative behavior that's now causing riots? Get out of our country and get out of our tournament. Goodbye. Yeah.
He's he is also opinionated on others in tennis. Like, can you imagine if this was Naomi Osaka or Serena Williams, and the way that it would be positioned in tennis? Like you said, this is about money. This is about him being the world number one. This is him about being the defending champion at the Australian Open. This is about him being, who he is. And I got to tell you, there was a time I was a huge fan. My mom was born in Dubrovnik. There's a Yugoslav heritage here. There's always been this like, yay, go. And then, but he lost me in 2020 when he had a party, when the rest of us were like, are you kidding me right now?
Him and the Prime Minister of England. So
right? Oh, he didn't think it was a party though. Boris can't even. Boris. Hey, you know what? At George _Affleck, at George_Affleck on Twitter, at Jody Vance on Twitter. Go to the Orca.ca, read my column. It's called The Middle. It drops every Wednesday, middle of the week, go figure. And make sure you sign up for the Fin. Just put your email address into the pop-up, and nobody sells your information or anything. You just get this straight to inbox with all the news you can use every weekday, which I love. The Fin. A super duper do. And we got a couple of things that are cooking over at the Orca. So make sure you're keyed in. There's some fun stuff coming.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Say goodnight, Georgie.
Good night, Jody.
Bye.
Bye.